I was born in Salt Lake, but about 3 months from that point, we moved to the Northwest. And I grew up in Spokane, so from about 61 to 69, I lived in Spokane, Washington, and then my dad was transferred in 69 to Portland, and we lived in Vancouver from 69 on. I spent a year in Phoenix, and I lived a little bit in Portland, but primarily I've lived in the area for over 50 years, almost 60 years. Growing up, it was always the mountain that looked sort of like a snow cone. It was a perfectly rounded top mountain, very different from the peak of Mount Hood or the kind of jagged edge of Mount Adams. But we didn't really think about too much that it was a volcano until, as it started to ramp up in 79 and 1980. I think mostly 1980, the months leading up to the eruption. But that became much more the focus. But it was always just a wonderful place to go to Spirit Lake and hang out there, or to just see Mount St. Helens outside my mom and dad's home. In the months leading up to it, people were really keeping an eye on it, and scientists were monitoring it really closely and giving the updates. And then as the earthquake activity started to increase, they started to project out and kind of think in terms of what could happen. I don't really remember a scenario where they said, okay, but this is going to be the case, and it's going to kind of erupt this way. I don't remember that being the case, but they definitely did draw the red zone and kind of an area that they believed would be in the eruption area, and they had kind of a mandatory evacuation early on, and people had to leave their homes. And there was a lot of really nice vacation homes, and people had beautiful homes around the lake, Spirit Lake. But largely it was a place that was a kind of a summer months type of place where you go hiking and boating on Spirit Lake. But there was quite a few that did take it seriously. The one person in particular, most famous, was Harry Truman, and he just dug his heels in and said, I'm not leaving. But and I think there were other people who were skeptical that something was going to happen, because you don't really think about a mountain kind of erupting suddenly. But yeah, I think most of the people did take it seriously. National Geological Society was their main source, and those were, they had gone in and set up all kinds of seismic instruments, and were kind of really monitoring the earthquake activity as kind of an early warning. I think there was probably other things that they might have been, kind of measuring the temperature of the lake and the rivers, that kind of thing. But generally, I think they were watching the seismic activity. I remember hiking in 1979, and a friend of mine and we hiked into a place called Mount Margaret, and that was, I think it was about 10 or 12 air miles from Mount St. Helens, and we were on a kind of a little ridge and could look down to Spirit Lake. And I remember we talked about the fact, and this was before the earthquake activity really ramped up, but we thought, wow, if this mountain blew, I wonder if we'd be okay here, and we just kind of thought about that a little bit. And then later there was a poster that came out, and it was of the Mount Margaret area, and it showed a before and after, and it was just completely obliterated. And so we later realized that we would have had only a minute or something to prepare for that. The blast would have killed us. I don't remember a lot of concern, and certainly not like, okay, we've got to have like water and food, and there wasn't that type of fear. I think it's a lot more like when an ice storm or a snowstorm comes, where people, start buying all the essentials, and there wasn't any of that type of activity, it didn't seem like. It was a Sunday, and the mountain blew at 8:32 in the morning, and I had gone to church, and so didn't realize, anything was a problem. And by the time we got out of church, word had kind of spread that the mountain had blown. But where I had gone to church, there was no visibility of the mountain from there. But when I got home, we could see the mountain from the house. The plume had gone up. It's kind of a famous picture of just this massive gray cloud moving. There was lightning involved. It kind of created its own sort of storm, in a sense, and so occasionally there'd be lightning. You had to kind of look closely to see the movement of the clouds of smoke and ash, but then immediately they had news reports on television, so you were watching the thing unfold. I remember being just amazed at the force of the river. The Toutle River was kind of a small river that came out of the Spirit Lake area, but when the mountain blew and all of the land fell into the lake, it just splashed out, and suddenly there was debris and water flowing down that Toutle River that went, I don't know, I think I remember seeing it maybe 20 feet higher than it was. And so there was marks on the trees and things where the debris had gone down. And it took out a bridge. And so the dramatic visuals were of debris and mud flow that's flowing down toward the Columbia River from Spirit Lake to the Columbia River via the Toutle River. That was pretty amazing footage. Our vantage point, we were kind of limited as to what we could see, but we could clearly see the mountain, and it had lost about 3,000 feet of elevation, just kind of disappeared, and then it looks very much the same today as it did that day. Yeah, the very first eruption in May 18th, we didn't get the ash. The air was blowing in such a way that it went east, so eastern Washington became dark. At 12 noon, it was, the street lights were on and visibility was very low. But we didn't get that, not until I can't remember when the next time it blew, but there was ash fall, and that was really serious. People, bought out all the masks. There was, super high shortage of masks. Police and ambulances and things had to be retrofitted with certain filtering systems that had to be attached to the cars, because it would just kind of choke the engines. And just driving around, you weren't really, supposed to be driving around too much, because the ash would fall like giant flakes of snow, but then it would just kind of sit on the ground like dust. And as people drove along, if you drove, very fast at all, it would kick up like, sand. And if it got mixed with water, if you tried to use your windshield wipers, it etched your windshield, after just a few swipes, you noticed that your windows had these tiny little scratches. And so, we were made very much aware that you weren't supposed to be breathing this stuff either, because it would affect your lungs. And yeah, there were several ash falls, and it didn't wash off real well. Like, you couldn't wash it off your car very easily. Accumulated in the gutters of people's homes, and they kind of weighed down, and some of them were, just kind of breaking off the houses. And if it rained after an ash fall, the ash kind of became a little bit more like concrete. It would get very heavy, and then it'd get very solid. You could at least kind of sweep it, but it was everywhere. I mean, it was tan snow, and I remember taking a pitcher of water and trying to wash it off the window of the car, and it just didn't seem to come off very easily. After the first couple of eruptions, people began to wonder whether or not there would be more eruptions, and if there was going to be more eruptions, would it take a different tact? Like, it had been clouds of ash and smoke and that type of thing, but would there be like lava? But again, we were a long way away. We didn't really anticipate that there would be, that much danger, but we definitely thought, okay, this ash stuff could happen fairly frequently, and what does that mean long term? But yeah, as far as like flood possibility or things like that, we didn't concern ourselves with that. But definitely the ash. I mean, I remember cleaning the car off and just thinking, okay, if this thing happens one more time, I think I'm going to move, because it was such a hassle, and it altered everyday life when it happened. It probably talked quite a bit, if I recall, about Mount Rainier, because it's so much closer to a huge city, and what would be the ramifications of that. I think there was quite a bit of talk about that, because Seattle's such a huge metropolitan area within about the same distance as Mount St. Helens is to Vancouver. We did think about, okay, we need to have masks, and just because of the breathing, the warning about breathing the dust. There may have been kind of a little bit of the boy cries wolf, I mean, the scientists had to kind of predict. It's a little bit like the weather, hey, there's going to be this massive snowstorm, and then it doesn't materialize. This was, hey, this is going to erupt. We don't know exactly when, but it's going to erupt. And because it did, I mean, there seemed to be quite a bit of credibility built up with that right then. I think the one thing that I recall is there was so much ash embedded in the trees that had been blown down, especially on the Windy Ridge area, which would have been kind of a southeast. Just the tree fall when the blast hit and put a bunch of trees into Spirit Lake, and then the hillside on the other side there got blown down. Those logs were kind of unusable because they had been embedded with ash, and it just, it wasn't like, oh, good, we can go in and log this. Those logs were kind of unusable. So I remember there was kind of a big upset with that so much of the logging industry in the area was affected in that way. Certainly, I mean, the economy of that area was tourism, and it was a long time before tourism kind of came back. There had to be road infrastructure and stuff rebuilt, and visitor centers and things went up, but that was quite a few years later. Having been up there in 1979 and hiked around Mount St. Helens just a little bit, and hiked around Spirit Lake, it made me very sad that all those houses were destroyed in an instant, and that the lake was pretty much unusable, and the region had just been, completely destroyed. It was a little bit like the feeling on a similar scale when the fireworks set off all the blaze in the gorge.
Eagle Creek.
Yeah, the Eagle Creek fire, and you realize that it won't be back in your lifetime, maybe. And there was kind of that feeling like, oh my gosh, this mountain area is changed for good. I mean, it did recover faster than a lot of people thought, but But yeah, as far as the beauty of it, it was a completely, I mean, it went from beautiful green to gray and browns, and no vegetation for a long time, and it really changed the landscape. I wasn't so much concerned about eruption damage to Vancouver, but just more the inconvenience of the continued ash falls and what that would mean. And I really do remember thinking, okay, if this happens too many more times, I'm gonna move. No, I mean, air conditioning filters, big industrial filters that are on top of buildings, those all had to be, swapped out. There was a lot of that kind of infrastructure change that had to take place. I mean, I look at places in the United States where there's hurricanes. I mean, that would be much more frightening. Tornadoes, hurricanes, floods on a yearly basis. That's much more concerning. Especially the area that was affected by the Toutle River and all the debris that came down. It affected I-5 north and south. It wiped out several bridges on the Toutle River. And I think the bridge, there was some freeway damage as well, I think, if I recall, but it really clogged up the Columbia River because all of that pyroclastic flow, mud flow and everything went into the Columbia River, and that affected shipping. And so the Army Corps of Engineers had to come and dredge all that up. And if you drive up Chehalis and that area, and you look over to the side, there's a big mound of what was ash that had to be pulled out of the river. And now it's covered with vegetation, but I mean, there's this sort of an odd big mound of leftover stuff that came out of the river from the Toutle River. And I remember the Army Corps of Engineers having to go in there and really do that. I think they left Spirit Lake pretty much just alone. There wasn't much there wasn't much to be done there. But to me, it seems like we've kind of forgotten about, I mean, the loss of life. There was like 70 people or something like that were killed, which is quite a bit for a natural disaster. But now there's sort of, I think, a sense of pride about having a volcano that has been so recently active. It's a little bit like, hey, this is our feature, this is our geological feature in this area. Some of that happens, and especially with the freeway or the highway that got put in and all the visitor centers and things they put so much money into. I mean, it's become quite a tourist attraction, so they did a good job of kind of making the best of what would be a bad situation. Yeah, I don't know specifics, but I would think that it really was an education as to what can happen with these volcanoes in this string, and how to prepare more efficiently or effectively for that. I mean, as I look back, I think they did as best they could to keep people out. I mean, people, were in that area and they shouldn't have been, but they were trying to get stuff out of their house and trying to save, memorabilia and things like that. And some just decided to stick it out and think that they could do that. But I think generally people were just concerned about their property and wanted to get stuff out. Kind of like how you see people going into fire areas, and getting whatever they can out of their house, not knowing if when they come back it's going to be there or not. I guess just in a general way, it's the idea that things don't always last forever, and so appreciate them while you can. I didn't spend a ton of time around the St. Helens area, but the one hike that I did take in '79, I remember vividly and really appreciate the old growth, walking through the old growth timber around St. Helens, and just the the beauty of how that lake set right at the base of this beautiful mountain, and now it's, you know, it's still pretty, but it doesn't look, you know, anywhere near the same, and the lake doesn't look anything like it. I guess, yeah, the transitory nature of changing landscapes. You know, you see that with erosion, you know, on the coastline, or forest fires that we mentioned, the gorge. Things that won't always be the way they are necessarily. You know, just really appreciate things while you can. I guess that would be a big lesson for me.